G'day guys, Dylan from Betfair here, chopping out J-Mac this time. He's having a bit of a break on the Pro Punter interviews. Special guest today, we're veering away from racing for once, heading to sports. Speaking to one of the biggest tennis punters out there, Ace Previews, or better known to us as Steve. Steve, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me, Dylan. Yeah, you look a little bit different to J-Mac, so nice to see he's been given a chop out for a little bit.
Yeah, a bit more hair, a bit of a beard, which is good. How's everything been going during COVID, mate? I know you're here in Melbourne as well, and tennis has been quite a bit of a talking point during COVID, especially, you know, that Novak video where he was out partying as well. How have you found it all?
Look, it's been different. It's been unexpected. I think, you know, when you look back on the start of this year, we thought probably the issues around the smoke and the bushfires in January in Victoria and New South Wales were probably going to be the biggest story there was on the tennis tour for the whole year. Fast forward 6 weeks and there's no more tennis for 6 months. So yeah, look, it's been different. It's been a little bit challenging trying to figure out, and, you know, obviously looking at this from both a tennis perspective and a small business perspective, trying to keep everything ticking along. But luckily I've got a lot of other things going at the same time to kind of keep me busy and keep things ticking over. And now tennis is back and we can have a good crack at the rest of what will be a bit of a weird year by the sounds of things and what's reported to be taking place.
Did you try betting other sports during this lockdown? Like for tennis, it was, you know, completely off for however long. You know, the AFL came back, you know, returned quite recently. Did you try and do anything at all, or do you just sort of stick to the tennis grind?
I generally try and stick to tennis. I mean, there was a little patch there where the Australian domestic circuit kind of kicked off there in July. Not in any serious way, I guess, venturing into AFL or NBA, but obviously I'm aware that it's there, and I follow both of them really closely. But I'm aware that my edge isn't probably there like it is with tennis. So nothing in any great detail, particularly, you know, March through May, probably just took a step back from everything and focused on other parts of life, and, you know, figured that tennis was going to be back at some point, and, you know, we'll pick that up when we get the big players, or some of the big players, back and playing.
Yeah, definitely. Let's wind it back. Tennis. It's obviously it's an interesting sport. It's certainly not easy to play, I guess, compared to something like a basketball or a footy. How did you get into tennis, and how did you get into betting on tennis?
Good question. We have to go a fair way back, actually. Tennis-wise, I've played tennis since I was, I think, 3 or 4. So tennis has kind of always been my key sport of interest, followed by basketball, and then AFL to a lesser extent. So I've always had an interest in tennis, and I guess at my age, I kind of missed the end of the Sampras Agassi years, particularly on the ATP side of things, and really, I guess, my formative years. And I was a ball boy at the Australian Open for a couple of years, you know, watching Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal up close when they were starting to, you know, really hit peak form. Always had an interest, always wanted to be around it. And I think the natural shift into betting that came with that was, you know, I always had an affinity with numbers, I think, growing up, and, you know, numbers and having a bit of a weird, quirky memory for particular events or things that have happened. So that seemed the natural progression. And I guess from a betting perspective, you know, it probably came from very early days Twitter and social media. It's, you know, once you start, you know, talking to the right people at the right time, that, you know, some opportunities and some doors open up, and, you know, all of a sudden you're writing tennis for people who, you know, have a voice and a say on social media, and it all kind of ballooned from there. And 7 and a bit years later, here we are.
So a lot of these stories, you know, we speak to a lot of like racing pro punters that, you know, their family was involved in racing, or, you know, they had family members that were into bookmaking or anything like that. Was your family involved in betting at all? Or was it just, you know, a casual, like a bet on the Friday night at the footy? How did the passion grow for that?
I don't think there was any particular, outside of, growing up and going to, the picnic races very rarely, there was never really a big association with it for me outside of, the Melbourne Cup or, a couple of those key events. And I think it's just that, and it might be the case for some other people as well, depending on where you find yourself at certain times in your life and who you immerse yourself with, if you can find people who, know what they're doing, and not everyone knows what they're doing, but if you can find the right people who know what they are doing, that you can, if you just act like a sponge and try and take as much information as you can, you can start to put your learnings into practice. And the things have changed significantly for me over the last 7.5 years doing this. And where I started to where I am now, there's a major divide, in between those two parts of the journey. But I think it's it's just something that, that love of tennis, and then also that wants to kind of do something with my life that involves numbers. So, I work in, a health profession outside of this. So, there's no real numbers work there. That was kind of what led me to it. And then I think once you start to notice that you're not too bad at something, that, it kind of grows from there. And probably more so, the last couple of years, that's obviously become more serious with writing out more previews and delivering more content as such. So yeah, it's been a bit of a journey, but wouldn't change anything.
Yep. So I want to touch on that. So you're sort of grinding along, you're building up your tennis knowledge, specifically from the betting side. Was there a tournament or maybe a period of time where you thought, okay, I'm a bit better than usual, and I can turn this into something proper?
I don't think I could pinpoint a particular tournament, but I think, very early on, when I was just kind of, flicking through odds and thinking about probabilities and my perspective on it, I just watched so much tennis that I felt like I had a pretty good handle on the situation over a longer period of time. I think that was probably, being able to know, and talk to people about players that, 90% of the population have never heard of, to be able to know kind of what those players are about and where they stack up, and to see those players injected into, Grand Slams or other tournaments, being able to, I think that's where I probably found my earlier edge is knowing, outside of the big names, where I perhaps knew a little bit more about those players than the general person, or hopefully someone who was setting lines at that particular time for matches. And then, from there, it's just kind of grown and evolved, and it still is. I don't think it's, you can't stay still in this day and age, particularly if 2020 has shown us anything so far, it's that you need to keep evolving and adapting and figuring out ways to keep moving forward.
Yeah. Obviously, I guess pre-COVID, tennis is flying. I think our homegrown Australian Open, it's record crowd numbers every single year. The broadcast deal is millions of dollars. What's the betting like? Is it hard to get a bet on? Are you restricted straight away? How much can you use sort of Betfair? What's it like betting wise, sort of day to day? Is it a struggle?
It's a struggle, and I think probably that's something that, and I'll admit that it's something that I'm still learning and adjusting with, is for me finding that balance between providing information for matches that I perhaps may not be able to get on at lower levels, and then obviously thinking about myself as well, and what I'm doing and what I'm able to do. Look, it really does vary. Some days, you'll post a preview or make a play, and you hit refresh on the odds on that 10, 20, 30 seconds later, and it's certainly disappeared. So, it can be tricky, and that's still something, as I said, that I'm still learning to adjust with. I think, you can pick, and early on, I think you can kind of pick and choose those niche markets, until you find yourself limited. So, looking at alternate handicaps and, lower level tournament selections. But, it's more of my focus, particularly over the last 12 months or so, has just been at top level and a little bit at the ATP Challenger level, because that's where, the liquidity is the highest. You're able to get involved a little bit more, with and from my perspective as well, delivering information, the odds are more accessible for people around the world. There are a lot of places, and you look, even if you just scroll through the, bookmakers in, lower level tournaments at the moment, you're likely to get a, match line price, and if you're lucky, a handicap and a total, but that's about all you're going to get. So it's a bit tricky trying to adjust, but, every week's a little bit different, looking at different places to be able to get on. But the high, Grand Slams, there's no issues getting on anywhere really. It's just a matter of trying to find the right prices at the right time, because it's a blessing and a curse with tennis. It's on 11 months of the year, and there's if you really want to go through all 11 months without a break, you can, but it's trying to balance that up a little bit as well. That can sometimes be a little bit tricky.
Yep. Pinnacle exiting the market is sort of like the gospel of truth, I guess, for bookmaking tennis. Did that have a big impact as well? The sort of, all the rest of the corporates, sort of hands in the air, didn't really know what to do?
I think so. Yeah. And it's made a difference for me personally, because now I can't quote Pinnacle prices in any capacity. And when I'm looking at recording my plays, and if now I'm using, Australian books or whatever markets are available there, to be able to, assess and look at closing lines, I'm using smaller bookmakers and comparing that to Pinnacle closing lines. So I'm digging myself a little bit of a hole there, but it's still trying to find the value spots. But I've certainly noticed that, since Pinnacle dropped off in Australia in terms of being able to access it and get at those odds, it's been a little bit trickier finding that balance and figuring out, what to post and how much to post.
Yep. I consider you sort of like a pioneer in terms of delivering content for free and educating, which is something that obviously resonates a lot with us in the Betfair Hub, because that's what we're trying to do. And you've built yourself quite a following on Twitter, well over 10,000 people. What's the motivation, I guess, for you to be so willing to share your thoughts? Like, there was a period there where you had a subscription service as well, just because the demand was so high. You're back to delivering free content, for your website and for the Betfair Hub as well. What's the motivation, I guess, for you to be so willing just to share your thoughts and your edges, week to week?
Yeah, I think it's finding a bit of balance, I guess, for me with what I was doing. And, I probably had that 18-month period there where there was a subscription service, and it was successful and it did work in a lot of ways, but there are also some other pressures that do come with that, particularly with tennis being, there's tennis going on somewhere pretty much every day of the year in some particular time zone. And, when you're providing a service, per month or per week, that, it can build up over time, in terms of being quite draining, kind of backing up day on day and delivering that content. And I guess, I probably found I struggled a little bit to find that balance at times. I think ultimately, with the way that I run everything through the business and through the website at the moment, look, it probably comes more from, I have an appreciation and a love of the sport above anything else. And I think the thing that I gain most from is, when people get in touch or, email or send messages on Twitter and say that they've now started following Challenger tennis, or they've had more of an interest in the sport for one reason or another because of particular content. So I've just found that, and particularly after everything that's gone on in the last 6 months, felt a bit silly thinking about trying to charge people for a period of time that, look, it's different to any other time. We don't have any historical data that we can work off for the next little period. So why not try and put everything out there for free, have things up on the hub, have things up on the website, and, just have a bit of a trial and error with a couple of different types of content and streaming, and, get as many people involved as possible, because, it can be quite, and I think, from one of the last interviews, I think Shane mentioned it as well, that, it can be quite an isolating experience if you're just doing this for yourself. And in my instance, sending, emails out to subscribers, that, there's probably not a lot of back and forth there. It's a lot of one-way communication. I think just being able to have a bit more freedom to basically post whatever I want and do whatever I want for a little bit, and just kind of see what comes from it. If it works, then fantastic. If not, then that's life. That's something I'm content with. It's, you know, it's not going to be the end of the world for me. It's just something different that I'm happy to try.
Yeah, those emails, it's a race to get the odds, because if you're not quick, they're gone. I can tell you that from experience.